Imagine that you were never the kind of person who believed in justice. It wasn't that you hated justice necessarily, but you never saw it as something real. You studied law because your father wanted you to, and you climbed the judicial ladder because the salary was acceptable and the position brought respect. As for justice, you left that to those who believed in it. The first bribe you took wasn't really a bribe, at least that's how you convinced yourself. It was a white envelope a lawyer placed on your desk with a smile, telling you it was a gesture of appreciation before you issued any ruling. You opened it after he left. It contained the equivalent of 2 months' salary. The next day you returned the envelope. Then you thought about it all week. Then you called him and told him you accepted the appreciation. The ruling went in favor of his client. That was 12 years ago. Since that day, you never returned a single envelope. In fact, you became far more organized than that. You no longer waited for lawyers to approach you. You built a silent, precise system that everyone who dealt with you understood. You sat behind your bench with a composed face and a calm voice, delivering judgments with the confidence of someone who believes in what he says, while inside you were doing the math. You didn't feel guilty. You felt clever. The problem with being clever is that it sometimes convinces you that you are immune to mistakes. You weren't immune. You were just lucky. And there's a big difference between the two. During those 12 years, cases passed before you that should have changed the lives of real people. A man accused of a crime he didn't commit, but the other side paid more, so the verdict was issued. He went to prison, and you went to dinner. A woman demanding her rightful share of her father's inheritance, but her uncles were more generous, so she left the courtroom empty-handed, her eyes red, and you never looked at her. You stored these stories in a distant corner of your memory and locked the door. An ordinary person would have lost sleep. You slept well. Then came the case of the businessman. His name was Fares Al-Mansour, and he was the kind of man who filled a room the moment he entered, not with the size of his body, but with a quiet confidence that told everyone around him he knew something they didn't. He sat in front of you in your office before the trial even began. He didn't bring an envelope, and he didn't send a lawyer. He came himself. He opened a small leather briefcase on your desk, looked at you calmly, and said, "I don't pay in advance, but when I pay generously."
You asked him for the number. He smiled and said, "Double what you're used to." His case involved a massive land deal on the outskirts of the city. A local government claimed he had seized it using forged documents. The evidence was heavy, the prosecutors were serious, and any clean judge would have convicted him without hesitation. But you hadn't been a clean judge for 12 years. You issued a verdict of acquittal. The next day, you found a number in your account that made you sit and stare at the screen for a full minute. Fares Al-Mansour wasn't satisfied with one acquittal. He returned 2 months later with another case, then a third. Each time he came, he raised the price slightly, and each time he raised it, you agreed faster. You began to wait for his call the way a man waits for his monthly salary. No, even more. You thought of him while looking at other cases, comparing, realizing that what others paid now seemed insignificant. You raised your prices on everyone. An old lawyer who had dealt with you for years came in expecting the usual rate. You told him the prices had changed. He looked at you in shock, then anger, and left without finishing his sentence. He never returned. You didn't care. 10 others came after him, ready to pay. You were at your peak, you believed that. But Fares Al-Mansour believed in something entirely different. One night he invited you to dinner at his home. It was the kind of house that made you reassess your own wealth and find it modest. You sat alone at a long table, and after the meal he pulled out a file and placed it in front of you. You said, "What is this?" He replied, "My next case." You opened the file. It was about a contract between him and a former partner, a man named Tariq Al-Zahrani, who claimed that Fares had embezzled more than 30 million from him. You said, "This is different. The evidence." He interrupted calmly. "The evidence doesn't matter to me. I pay you because you understand that the evidence doesn't matter." You looked at him. He looked at you. Then you pushed the file back toward him and said, "My price has doubled." He smiled, "Of course." What you didn't know was that Tariq Al-Zahrani was not just an angry former partner. He was a man who had lost everything. And when a man loses everything, he becomes dangerous in a way that those who haven't experienced it cannot understand. Tariq sold his car to pay for a good lawyer. He sold his watch to hire a private investigator. And when he had nothing left to sell, he went to a journalist he knew and placed everything he had gathered in front of him.
When you read your name in a newspaper for the first time, you don't believe it. You read it again, then a third time, and each time you hope the letters have rearranged themselves into something else. But they don't. Your name is there, clear, fixed, and beside it are numbers, dates, and case names you thought had been buried long ago. The first thing you did was call Fares. No answer. You called again. No answer. The third time, a voice you didn't recognize told you your number was no longer in service. You hung up and looked out of your office window at the street, and for the first time in many years, you felt something cold spreading through your chest. But you didn't panic. That had always been your strength, your ability to stay calm when you needed to stay calm. You sat down and thought methodically.
The article didn't contain definitive proof yet. It had hints and accusations, and between hints and conviction lies a long distance, one you knew better than anyone how to stretch. You called your private lawyer, the one who knows what he knows and stays silent about what he must, and told him to be ready. He asked, "Since when?" You said, "Since now." The following days felt heavy in a strange way. On the surface, nothing had changed. You went to court, sat on your bench, delivered your rulings with the same voice and the same face. But the people around you had changed. Colleagues who used to smile when they saw you now smiled differently, a smile containing something you couldn't quite name but understood very well. Lawyers who used to approach you in the corridors now found reasons to turn away before reaching you. Rats leave the ship before it sinks. You knew that. You were the one who taught them, without meaning to. Then you were officially summoned to an investigative committee. The summons was a white sheet stamped with official seals in dry language, but its impact felt like someone slowly pulling the ground from beneath your feet. You sat with your lawyer that night and built a precise plan. Deny everything, demand evidence, question the sources, tie Tarek al-Zahrani to personal motives and old grudges. It was a good plan, and you knew how to execute it. But Tarek wasn't working alone. The private investigator he hired had spent 4 months gathering evidence, and what he gathered wasn't just numbers and dates, it was witnesses, real people with real names. Some were lawyers who had dealt with you, some were court clerks, and one of them was closer to you than you could imagine. Your personal assistant, the one who had worked with you for 7 years. When you found out, you didn't get angry. You were past anger. You only felt that coldness expanding in your chest, filling spaces that once held other things. You sat before the investigative committee with the same calm you had shown before thousands of defendants. You gave calculated answers, denied what needed denying, admitted what caused no harm, and at every moment appeared as a man confident in the cleanliness of his hands. It was a flawless performance. By the end of the first session, you thought you had succeeded. You left the room and breathed in the cold air of the corridor, and for a brief moment that old confidence returned, the confidence of someone who knows how things work and how to move them.
Then you saw Tarek al-Zahrani at the end of the hallway. He wasn't walking toward you. He was just standing there, looking at you. In the following weeks, things seemed to be going in your favor. The investigation slowed. The evidence was debated. Your lawyer did exactly what you paid him to do. You began to feel that the storm might pass by without touching you. You started sleeping better. You even began thinking about a short vacation once all of this was over. One evening, you were sitting in your office, files around you, the city outside your window glowing as it did every night, when your phone rang. An unknown number. You answered. A calm voice said, "Judge." You said, "Who is this?" "It doesn't matter. What matters is that we know where the money went, all of it." You hung up. You looked at the phone. It rang again. This time, you didn't answer. The next morning, a news website published a single document. Not multiple documents, not a long report, just one image of a bank account, numbers, dates, transfers, and at the top of the page, one name. Your name. Everything ended faster than you expected. The seat was not as comfortable as it had looked from above. You sat in the courtroom, and for the first time in your life, you looked at the bench from below. The judge sitting above was a man you didn't know, relatively young, with the seriousness of someone who still believes in what he does. You looked at him and thought of yourself in your early days, before the first white envelope, when your face held something similar to his. The judge read the charges. They were long, longer than you expected, even you who had created them. When he finished, he looked at you and asked, "Do you have anything to say?" You opened your mouth, closed it, then opened it again, and said, "No." The sentence was 12 years in prison, the same number of years you spent selling justice. You didn't notice the symmetry at that moment. You noticed it later in your cell, when you had enough time to notice such things. But the real punishment wasn't prison. Prison you understood. You had sent many people there and imagined what it looked like from the inside. What you never imagined, not once in 12 years of corruption, was that on your first day behind bars, a guard would open your cell door and tell you that someone wanted to see you. A man entered and sat in front of you. He took his time, then said calmly, "I'm the director of this prison. 7 years ago, you were the one who sentenced my brother to prison on a fabricated charge because the other side paid you." You remained silent. He said, "I won't do anything outside the law, but I will make sure you don't forget a single day of these 12 years. He stood up and left. You looked at the wall in front of you. For the first time in your life, you had nothing to say to yourself. The end.